"You're no daughter of mine, Hannah," my father's voice rasped through the cracked hospital door, each syllable a cold blade slicing through the 600 miles I'd driven from Memphis to Willow Creek, Oregon. The fluorescent lights of the medical center buzzed like a swarm of restless wasps, casting a sterile pallor on the linoleum floor, where my boots, still gritty from the long road, left faint trails of dust. I was 35, a freelance graphic designer who'd spent years sketching stories for others, my eye for detail catching what most missed. Yet here I stood, chasing a goodbye to a man dying of pancreatic cancer, stage 4, a man who'd banished me 8 years ago. That night, my father, Richard, had thrown my clothes onto the rain-soaked lawn, his face twisted with rage as he declared I'd betrayed the family by leaving for Memphis. Now, clutching a memory of my mother's laughter at the Willow Creek farmer's market, her hand sorting apples, her smile weaving our family into the town's salty, sea breeze heart, I thought I could find closure, a way to stitch up the wound that had never healed. I was wrong that I knocked, my pulse a relentless drumbeat in my chest. The door opened just enough to reveal my father's gaunt frame, his skin sallow, his eyes sharp with a coldness that illness hadn't dulled. He was whispering to my sister, Evelyn, her silhouette sharp and poised behind him. "We made a promise to your mother," he murmured, the words barely audible but heavy, like stones dropped into still water. When he saw me, his gaze hardened, as if I were a stranger intruding on a private grief. "Hannah," he said, his voice low and final, "you don't belong here." The door slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot down the quiet hallway, reverberating in my bones. A nurse nearby averted her eyes, her pity a weight I didn't want. The vigil crowd, neighbors, shopkeepers, faces from a past I'd tried to bury, stood clustered near the waiting area, their whispers rising like a tide. "She shouldn't be here," one voice hissed. "After what she did," another muttered. Sharp and judgmental, what I did? I'd done nothing but leave to build a life, to escape the suffocating grip of a family that never saw me. The accusation stung, but it was the whisper about my mother that caught like a thorn in my mind. A promise. To her? She'd been gone 9 years, taken by a sudden heart attack, her warmth the glue that held Willow Creek together. Why mention her now, in that hushed, secretive tone? And then I saw Mrs. Carter, the neighbor who'd organized art fairs with my mother, her hands once stained with paint alongside Mom's. She stood among the crowd, her eyes meeting mine for a fleeting moment before flickering with something, guilt, shame, or fear, before she turned away. The weight of that look settled in my gut, a seed of doubt sprouting. Was my father's rejection more than anger? Was it hiding something about my mother, about this town, the farmer's market, where my mother once taught me to pick the ripest apples, their skins gleaming under the coastal sun, felt like a betrayed dream under these sterile lights. 8 years ago, I'd left Willow Creek to escape the shadow of my father's disapproval and Evelyn's calculated charm. In Memphis, I'd built a life, crafting designs that told stories of hope, resilience, beauty. But standing here, the sting of being cast out burned anew, sharper than I'd expected. The community's murmurs pressed in, their judgment a heavy cloak I couldn't shake. I wanted to scream, to pound on that door and demand answers. Why did my father shut me out? Why did Mrs. Carter's eyes betray a secret? Was Evelyn orchestrating this, her presence behind that door a silent challenge? Inside, my heart churned, a storm of hurt and rage. But my mother's voice echoed in my mind, steady, calm, urging me to see the details others missed. I'd spent years honing that skill, spotting the off-kilter line in a design, the hidden flaw in a composition. Now, I turned it on this moment. My father's words, "promise to your mother," weren't just grief, they were guarded, deliberate. Mrs. Carter's glance wasn't just pity, it was weighted, as if she knew something she couldn't say. And Evelyn, always Evelyn, her shadow looming larger than the hospital room could hold. My breath slowed, my hand steadying. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. Instead, I stood still, my eyes scanning the crowd, cataloging every whisper, every glance. The farmer's market, the art fairs, the community my mother loved, they were pieces of a puzzle I didn't yet understand. Was I here for closure, or for something bigger, a truth I'd been denied? The question burned, but I buried it deep, letting it fuel the quiet resolve growing inside me. I'd come 600 miles to say goodbye, but now I wondered if I'd come to reclaim something else. My mother's memory, perhaps, or my place in a family that had cast me out. The crowd's murmurs faded as I focused, my mind sharp, my heart cold. Evelyn might think she'd won, standing guard behind that door, but I'd learned long ago to see what others overlooked. If there was a lie here, I'd find it. If there was a betrayal, I'd expose it. The hospital hallway stretched before me, a battleground I hadn't chosen but wouldn't flee. My father's rejection still burned as I left the hospital hallway, the weight of his words and Mrs. Carter's guilty glance pressing against my ribs. I didn't crumble. Instead, I walked to my car in the Willow Creek Medical Center's parking lot, the coastal wind sharp with salt, slicing through the dusk. I was a graphic designer, trained to see the fault lines in a perfect image. And something about this town, its whispers, its secrets, was off. I needed to understand why my father had shut me out, why he'd whispered about a promise to my mother. The answers weren't in that sterile hallway. They were out here, in the town that had once been my home. I drove to the Willow Creek Diner, a weathered shack where locals gathered over coffee and gossip. The neon sign flickered, casting a red glow on the gravel lot. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of fried onions and sea brine. I slid into a booth, my notebook open, pen poised like a weapon. My mother's face flashed in my mind, not her laughter, but the way she'd stand tall, organizing community events, her presence a quiet strength. I'd always thought she was the town's heart, but now I wondered what they'd taken from her. A waitress, her name tag reading Doris, poured me coffee, her eyes lingering. "You're Hannah Larson," she said, not a question. "Folks are talking. Say you're stirring trouble." Her tone wasn't hostile, but it wasn't warm either. I met her gaze, steady. "What kind of trouble?" She hesitated, glancing at the counter where two old fishermen sat, their voices low. "Your family, they've got a reputation to keep." Before I could press her, the diner door swung open, and Evelyn walked in, her husband Paul trailing like a shadow. My sister's presence was a performance, hair perfect, smile practiced, the town's darling playing her part. She spotted me and strode over, her heels clicking on the checkered floor. "Hannah," she said, loud enough for the diner to hear, "you're embarrassing yourself. Go back to Memphis." The words were a calculated strike, meant to shame me before the locals. Paul shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting away. I didn't flinch. "Why is everyone so nervous, Evelyn?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. "What are you and Dad hiding?" Her smile faltered, just for a second, but it was enough. The fishermen at the counter stopped talking, their heads turning. Doris paused, coffee pot in hand. Evelyn recovered, her laugh bright but brittle. "You're delusional," she said, turning to the room as if they were her audience. "My sister's always been dramatic. She left us, you know. Broke Dad's heart." The lie landed like a stone, and the diner's patrons nodded, their faces a mix of pity and agreement. I felt the air shift, the town closing ranks around Evelyn's perfect image. But Paul's silence was louder than her words. He wouldn't meet my eyes, his hands fidgeting with his wedding ring. "Paul," I said, standing, my voice cutting through the hum, "you were close to my mother. Did she ever mention a promise to Dad?" The question was a gamble, but I saw it hit, his shoulders tensed, his jaw tight. Evelyn's hand clamped onto his arm, her nails digging in. "Don't," she hissed, but it was too late. The diner went quiet, every eye on us. Paul mumbled something about needing air and bolted for the door. Evelyn's glare could have shattered glass, but I held it, my heart steady. "You're digging your own grave, Hannah," she said, her voice a venomous whisper. She swept out, the crowd parting for her like she was royalty. Doris approached, her voice low. "Careful, hon, your sister's got this town wrapped around her finger." "But, your mother?" She was different. People loved her, till they didn't. Her words were a spark, igniting a question I hadn't dared ask. Why did the town turn on my mother? What had Evelyn done to shift their loyalty? I sat back down, my pen moving across the notebook, sketching not designs but fragments of this moment, Evelyn's faltering smile, Paul's nervous hands, Doris's cryptic warning. My work had taught me to see the cracks in a facade, and this town was full of them. Evelyn's performance was flawless, but that flicker of fear betrayed her. Paul's silence wasn't just guilt, it was a thread I could pull. And Doris, a stranger who'd known my mother, had just handed me a piece of the puzzle. The diner's hum resumed, but I felt the weight of eyes on me, the town watching, judging. I didn't care. My mother's memory was a fire inside me, not warm but fierce, demanding truth. Evelyn thought she could shame me into leaving, but she'd miscalculated. I wasn't the girl who'd fled 8 years ago, suitcases soaked in rain. I was the woman who saw through lies, who built stories from fragments. What had my mother given this town that they'd so easily forgotten? And why was Evelyn so desperate to keep it buried? The coffee grew cold, but I stayed, my mind sharp, mapping the next move. Paul's reaction was a crack I could widen. If he knew something about my mother, I'd find a way to make him talk. Evelyn's grip on this town was tight, but not unbreakable. I closed my notebook, the pages filled with notes that weren't just words but weapons. The diner's neon glow pulsed outside, a beacon in the coastal dark. I'd come to say goodbye, but now I was here to fight, for my mother, for the truth, for the place I'd once called home. Evelyn's venomous whisper, "You're digging your own grave," still echoed as I left the diner, the neon glow fading behind me. The coastal night pressed in, sharp with salt and secrets, but Paul's nervous fidgeting and Doris's cryptic warning about my mother's fall from grace burned brighter. I wasn't running. My boots crunched on the gravel as I headed to Mr. Hayes' antique shop, a cluttered haven on Willow Creek's main street, its windows glowing like embers. My mother used to browse here, her fingers tracing old books, her voice soft as she shared stories of the town's past. If anyone knew why the town turned on her, it would be Mr. Hayes, the quiet observer who'd slipped me art books as a kid. Inside, the shop smelled of dust and polished wood, shelves crammed with relics, clocks, lamps, faded photographs. Mr. Hayes stood behind the counter, his glasses catching the lamplight, his face softening when he saw me. "Hannah," he said, his voice low, "you're back." I didn't waste time. "Why did people stop loving my mother?" I asked, my tone steady, eyes locked on his. He hesitated, his hands pausing over a stack of ledgers. "Your mother was the soul of the farmer's market," he said, "but your father, he made choices." My pulse quickened. "What choices?" He sighed, pulling a worn ledger from the shelf, its pages yellowed, edges curling like secrets. "Your father refused to sell my shop to fund the market years ago. Said it was his legacy. But your mother took the credit for keeping it alive. Some folks, your sister included, said she stole the spotlight." The words hit like a slap. My mother, stealing? She'd poured her heart into that market, her hands organizing stalls, her smile drawing crowds. I leaned closer, my voice low. "Evelyn said that?" Mr. Hayes nodded, his eyes flickering with unease. "She and your father pushed the story. Said your mother was unreliable. The town believed them." His words were a blade, cutting through the image of my mother I'd held sacred. But it was his next sentence that stopped me cold. "I heard your father at a town meeting, years back. He said letting your mother take the fall saved his reputation." Paul was there, too, quiet, but he nodded along. Paul, Evelyn's husband, the man who'd flinched at my question in the diner. My mind raced, piecing together fragments. Was this why my father shut me out? To keep me from uncovering his betrayal of my mother? The shop's air felt heavier, the relics around me whispering of a past I didn't fully know. I took the ledger, my fingers brushing the brittle pages. "Can I see this?" I asked. Mr. Hayes hesitated, then nodded. "Be careful, Hannah. Some truths cut deep." I didn't respond, my eyes scanning the ledger's faded ink, names, dates, contributions to the market. My mother's name was there, scrawled in her neat script, but crossed out, replaced by Evelyn's. The sight twisted something inside me, not grief but a cold, sharp resolve. Evelyn hadn't just taken my mother's place, she'd erased her. And my father had let it happen. Outside, the town's lights flickered, a facade of warmth hiding a colder truth. The community had loved my mother, but they'd turned on her, swayed by lies. I clutched the ledger, its weight a promise. My work as a designer had taught me to find the flaw in a perfect picture, and this town was no masterpiece. Evelyn's public shaming in the diner was a performance, but Mr. Hayes' words were a crack in her armor. Paul's silence, his nod. At that meeting, was another. I wasn't here to beg for my father's love anymore. I was here to unravel the lie that had stolen my mother's legacy. The ledger was my first weapon, a record of a betrayal I'd only begun to understand. The ledger's weight in my hands felt like a vow as I left Mr. Hayes' shop, its pages a silent accusation against Evelyn and my father for erasing my mother's legacy. My mother's name, crossed out and replaced by my sister's, burned in my mind, a betrayal etched in faded ink. I drove through Willow Creek's quiet streets, the town's lights dim under a sky heavy with coastal fog, to the small museum where Nancy worked. She was my last hope for answers, a keeper of the town's history who'd once shared my mother's love for its stories. If anyone could uncover what my mother had been accused of, it was her. The museum, a brick building tucked behind the community center, stood dark, its windows reflecting my resolve. I wasn't here to grieve, I was here to dig. Nancy met me at the door, her hair tied back, her eyes sharp with curiosity. "Hannah," she said, ushering me inside, "you're chasing ghosts." Her tone was gentle, but I caught the flicker of unease in her glance. The museum smelled of old paper and wax, its shelves lined with records of Willow Creek's past, births, deaths, town meetings. I handed her the ledger, pointing to my mother's crossed-out name. "This isn't right," I said, my voice low, controlled. "Mr. Hayes said my mother was blamed for something with the farmer's market. I need to know what." Nancy's fingers paused on the ledger, her lips tightening. She didn't answer right away, instead leading me to a back room where boxes of yellowed documents sat stacked like tombstones. She pulled a folder, its edges frayed, and spread its contents on a table. A single sheet caught my eye, a meeting minute from 9 years ago, the ink smudged but legible. It stated my mother was removed as the market's organizer for inappropriate behavior, signed by my father and Evelyn. My breath caught. Inappropriate behavior? My mother had been meticulous, her plans for the market precise, her love for the town woven into every stall. I looked at Nancy, my gaze unyielding. This is a lie. What did they say she did? Nancy hesitated, her hands trembling slightly. They claimed she mismanaged funds, she said finally. Said she took donations meant for the market. But there's no proof here, just their word. The room spun, not with grief but with a cold, sharpening clarity. My mother, accused of theft? The woman who'd taught me to count pennies for honesty, who'd spent her nights balancing the market's books. I scanned the minute again, my designer's eye catching a detail. The date was a month before her death, when she was supposedly too ill to work. This date, I said, pointing. She was bedridden then. How could she mismanage anything? Nancy's eyes widened, then darted away. I don't know, she stammered. Evelyn pushed the story hard. Said it was to protect the town's trust. Your father backed her. The words were a punch, revealing not just a lie but a calculated campaign. Evelyn hadn't just erased my mother's name, she'd painted her as a thief, and my father had signed off on it. I stepped back, my hand steady despite the storm inside. Nancy's unease, the smudged minute, the absence of proof, it all pointed to a truth my family had buried. My mother's death, so sudden, so final, now felt like a wound reopened. Had they lied to keep me away then, too? I took a photo of the minute with my phone, its faint text a weapon I'd wield later. Who else knew? I asked, my voice ablaze. Nancy swallowed. Half the town council. They didn't question it, Evelyn was convincing, and your father. He was respected. Respected. The word tasted bitter. My father, the man who'd built a hardware empire, had let his wife's name be dragged through the mud to save his own. The museum's silence pressed in, broken only by the hum of a distant heater. I thought of Evelyn, her smug smile in the diner, her grip on Paul's arm. She'd built her throne on my mother's ruin, and the town had bowed to it. But Nancy's hesitation, her nervous hands, they told me she wasn't fully in Evelyn's camp. Thank you, I said, my tone cold but polite. I left, the folder tucked under my arm, its contents a map to a betrayal I was only beginning to chart. The coastal fog thickened outside, cloaking Willow Creek in a haze that matched my thoughts. My mother's legacy wasn't just erased, it was stolen, and I'd been kept in the dark to protect the thieves. My resolve hardened, not with tears but with a quiet, burning focus. Evelyn thought she'd won, but this minute was a crack in her lie. I'd find more. I'd break her facade wide open. The museum's fog-soaked air clung to me as I clutched the meeting minute, its smudged ink branding my mother a thief, a lie crafted by Evelyn and my father. My resolve was a blade, sharpened by every revelation, cutting through the haze of Willow Creek's secrets. I needed Paul now, my sister's husband, whose nervous flinch in the diner and silent nod at the town meeting hinted at a truth he couldn't hide. If Evelyn had manipulated the town, she'd manipulated him too. I found him at the pier, where the ocean roared against weathered posts, his figure hunched under a flickering street lamp, cigarette smoke curling like a confession. Paul, I called, my voice steady, slicing through the wind. He startled, dropping the cigarette, its ember hissing in a puddle. Hannah, he said, his eyes darting as if Evelyn might appear. You shouldn't be here. His voice was low, strained, but I caught the crack in it, guilt, not anger. I stepped closer, the meeting minute folded in my pocket, its weight a silent ally. You knew my mother, I said, my gaze locked on his. What did she ask you to keep quiet about? His face paled, his hands shoving into his coat. Nothing, he muttered, but his eyes betrayed him, flickering with a fear I recognized. Evelyn's shadow loomed over him. Even here, don't lie, I said, my tone cold, unyielding. The town accused my mother of stealing from the market, but she was bedridden. You were at that meeting? You nodded when they smeared her. Paul's jaw tightened, his breath uneven. He glanced at the ocean, as if it could swallow his words. Your mother, she made me promise, he said finally, his voice barely above the waves. She found out the market's funds were short. She told me to stay quiet, said she'd handle it. But Evelyn, he stopped, his hands trembling. Evelyn threatened me. Said if I spoke, she'd ruin my business. She wanted your mother out, Hannah. She wanted control. The words hit like a tide, pulling the ground from under me. My mother, protecting the market, had carried its burdens alone, only for Evelyn to twist her silence into betrayal. I kept my face still, my designer's eye catching the details, Paul's shaking hands, the way his voice broke on Evelyn's name. Why didn't you tell anyone? I asked, my voice ablaze. He looked away, shame carving lines into his face. I was weak. Your mother was dying, and Evelyn. She made it sound like the town needed her more. I believed her. His confession was a crack in the wall Evelyn had built, but it wasn't enough. What else? I pressed, stepping closer. What did Evelyn make you hide? Paul's eyes met mine, wide with panic. She said your mother's heart attack wasn't just stress. She said it was guilt. But I saw your mother that week, she wasn't guilty. She was scared. Scared. The word sank into me, not as pain but as fuel. My mother, the woman who'd taught me to see truth in details, had been cornered, her silence weaponized by my sister. Paul's admission shifted everything. Evelyn hadn't just smeared my mother, she'd preyed on her vulnerability, ensuring her fall. The pier's wind howled, but I stood firm, my mind racing. Paul wasn't just a witness, he was a liability, one Evelyn had tried to control. You owe her, I said, my voice low, deliberate. Help me prove what Evelyn did. He shook his head, backing away. I can't. She'll destroy me. But his eyes told a different story. Guilt was eating him alive. I turned to leave, the minute still in my pocket, Paul's words a new piece in the puzzle. The town's lights glimmered in the distance, a facade of unity hiding a deeper rot. Evelyn's manipulation wasn't just about the market, it was about power, about erasing my mother to claim her place. My mother's fear, her silence, wasn't weakness, it was sacrifice, one I'd make right. I didn't look back at Paul, but I felt his gaze, heavy with regret. My steps were steady, my heart a furnace of resolve. Evelyn thought she could silence the past, but I was unearthing it, piece by piece. The ocean roared behind me, a reminder of the tide I'd turned. Paul's confession at the pier, my mother's fear, Evelyn's threats, burned in my chest as I walked away, the ocean's roar fading behind me. His words had cracked open a truth. My sister hadn't just stolen my mother's legacy, she'd weaponized her silence. I needed more than fragments now. Mrs. Carter, the neighbor who'd once painted beside my mother, had flinched under my gaze in the hospital. Her guilt was a thread I could pull. I drove to her house, a modest cottage on Willow Creek's edge, its porch sagging under the weight of coastal winters. The night was thick with mist, but my resolve was sharper, a blade honed by every lie. I'd uncovered. I knocked, and Mrs. Carter opened the door, her face pale under the porch light, her hands clutching a shawl like a shield. Hannah, she said, her voice trembling, it's late. I didn't smile. You knew my mother better than anyone, I said, stepping forward, my eyes locked on hers. Why did you let Evelyn destroy her? Her breath hitched, and she glanced behind her, as if the walls might betray her. Come inside, she whispered, leading me to a living room cluttered with art supplies, their colors faded like memories. A painting of the farmer's market hung above the fireplace, my mother's brushstrokes unmistakable in the vibrant stalls. She sat, her hands twisting the shawl. Your mother, she made a choice, Mrs. Carter began, her voice low, as if afraid of being overheard. There was a scandal, years ago. A council member, Edith Klein, embezzled funds from the market. Your mother found out, but Edith was her friend. She took the blame to protect her, to keep the community whole. My heart stilled, not with pain but with a cold, dawning clarity. My mother, accused of theft, had sacrificed her name for someone else. I leaned forward, my voice steady. And Evelyn? Mrs. Carter's eyes dropped. Your sister spread the story. Said your mother was reckless, untrustworthy. She wanted the market's leadership, Hannah. She let the town believe the lie. The words were a gut punch, but I didn't flinch. My mother's sacrifice, her silence to shield a friend, had been twisted into a weapon by Evelyn's ambition. I saw it now, the pattern I'd been trained to spot as a designer. Every lie, every accusation, was a brushstroke in Evelyn's portrait of control. Why didn't you stop her? I asked, my tone ice cold. Mrs. Carter's hands shook, tears welling. I tried. I told your mother to fight back, but she said it would tear the town apart. She made me promise to stay quiet, for Edith's sake. Her voice broke, but I saw the truth in her eyes, guilt, not for lying, but for honoring a vow that cost my mother everything. The room's air grew heavy, the painting above us a silent witness. I stood, my movements deliberate, my mind cataloging every detail, Mrs. Carter's trembling hands, the market's vibrant colors, the name Edith Klein. Evelyn hadn't just manipulated Paul. She'd preyed on my mother's loyalty, turning her sacrifice into a scandal. My father's silence, his complicity, was another betrayal. Did my father know? I asked, my voice ablade. Mrs. Carter nodded, barely. He let Evelyn lead. Said it was easier. Easier. The word was a spark, igniting the fire inside me. My mother's heart, her strength, had held this town together, and they'd let her fall to save their own. I left the cottage, the mist curling around me like a shroud. Mrs. Carter's confession was a cornerstone, proof that my mother's ruin was no accident. Evelyn's lies had spread like poison, and the town had drunk it willingly. My hands gripped the steering wheel, steady despite the storm within. I wasn't the girl who'd left Willow Creek 8 years ago, broken by rejection. I was the woman who saw through facades, who'd built a life finding truth in details. This wasn't just about my mother's name, it was about the cost of loyalty, the price of silence. Evelyn's throne was built on my mother's grave, but I'd tear it down. The coastal night stretched before me, vast and unyielding. Mrs. Carter's tearful confession, that my mother sacrificed her reputation to protect Edith Klein, left a raw ache, but it only sharpened my focus. Evelyn's lies had painted my mother as a thief, and my father's silence had endorsed the betrayal, a wound deeper than any rejection. I wasn't here to mourn, I was here to dismantle their facade. Miss Karen Walsh, a lawyer whose name I'd found in my mother's old address book, tucked between faded sketches of market stalls, was my next move. Her office, perched above a Willow Creek bookstore, was a narrow space where the scent of coffee mingled with leather-bound files, the windows rattling against the coastal wind's relentless push. I carried the meeting minute, pulse trembling. Admission, and Mrs. Carter's burdened truth, each a shard of evidence I'd lay before her. Ms. Walsh sat behind a cluttered desk, her glasses low, her eyes cutting through the dim light like a blade. I slid the photographed minute across to her, its smudged ink accusing my mother of theft. "This is a lie," I said, my voice steady, cold as the ocean outside. "Evelyn and my father claimed my mother mismanaged market funds, but she was bedridden." Paul said Evelyn threatened him to stay quiet. Mrs. Carter said my mother took the blame to protect Edith Klein. Ms. Walsh's pen paused, her gaze sharpening. "Edith Klein," she repeated, scribbling the name. "Still a council member. If your mother covered for her, we need proof, bank records, receipts, anything showing Klein's theft." She leaned forward, her voice measured but firm. "This minute is a start, Hannah. Accusing your mother without evidence? That's defamation. But we need more to make it stick." I nodded, my hand steady despite the storm within. My notebook, filled with connections I'd sketched, names, dates, lies, was a map of Evelyn's deceit. "Paul's scared," I said, "but he's guilty. He might break." Ms. Walsh's lips twitched, not a smile but a strategist's approval. "Then we lean on him. A deposition could crack him. And we dig for records. Your mother was meticulous, her files might still exist, maybe in your family's attic, maybe with Klein herself." Her words were a spark, igniting a plan. My mother's attic, a place I hadn't entered since I was a girl, might hold the truth. But Ms. Walsh's next sentence shifted the ground. "Your father's signature on that minute is the real problem. He didn't just let Evelyn lie, he approved it." "Why? What was he hiding?" The question hit like a wave, but I didn't flinch. My father, the man who'd built a hardware empire on community trust, had chosen his legacy over my mother's honor. His rejection at the hospital wasn't just cowardice, it was fear of exposure. "He's dying," I said, my tone flat. "Betraying no pain. But I need the truth before he's gone." Ms. Walsh's eyes softened, but her voice stayed sharp. "Then we file a defamation claim against Evelyn, demand a public retraction. It'll force her to respond, and Paul, maybe others, to pick a side. If your father's complicity runs deeper, we'll find it." She slid a legal pad toward me, her pen tapping. "Write every detail you remember about your mother's work, every vendor, every meeting, every name she mentioned. We're not just clearing her name, Hannah. We're exposing a family's betrayal." I wrote, my pen moving with the precision of my design work, each word a stroke against Evelyn's carefully crafted image. My mother's vendors, old Mr. Thompson with his apples, Clara with her woven baskets, flashed through my mind, their faces tied to her market, her heart. I listed them, along with dates from the minute, Paul's words at the pier, Mrs. Carter's trembling confession. Each entry was a weapon, a thread in the tapestry of lies I'd unravel. Ms. Walsh watched, her silence a quiet endorsement. "You're building a case," she said, her voice low. "But Evelyn's not alone. The town council, the community, they bought her story. Some might still protect her." Her warning was clear, this wasn't just a fight against my sister but against a town that had turned its back on my mother. The office's air grew heavy, the bookstore's hum below us a distant pulse. I thought of Evelyn's smug smile in the diner, her grip on Paul's arm, her throne built on my mother's ruin. "What if Paul won't talk?" I asked, my voice a blade. Ms. Walsh leaned back, her chair creaking. "Then we subpoena him. Fear can break a man faster than guilt. And Edith Klein, she's a loose end. If she's still counsel, she's got influence, but also secrets. We'll request her financial records, cross-reference them with the markets. Your mother's sacrifice might have saved her once, but not twice." Her confidence was a lifeline, but her next words were a jolt. "Your sister will fight dirty, Hannah. She's not just protecting her image, she's protecting your father's legacy. If he's hiding a financial mess, this claim could expose it." The idea that my father's empire, his hardware stores, his community standing, was built on more than just cowardice stopped me cold. A financial mess? It fit the pattern: his silence, his rejection, Evelyn's relentless control. My mother's death, so sudden, now felt like a piece of a larger lie. I stood, my movements deliberate, my notebook closed. "I'll check the attic," I said. "My mother kept everything: ledgers, letters, lists. If there's proof, it's there." Ms. Walsh nodded, her eyes gleaming with something like respect. "You're not like them," she said suddenly. "Your mother fought quietly, with grace. You fight with fire." The comment landed, but I didn't let it show. My mother's silence had been her strength, mine was in strategy, in tearing down the lies brick by brick. I left the office, descending the creaking stairs to the bookstore, where shelves of novels stood like silent witnesses. The coastal wind hit me as I stepped outside, sharp and unyielding, but my resolve was sharper. Evelyn thought she could bury the past, but I was unearthing it, minute by minute, confession by confession. Ms. Walsh was my ally, her legal precision. A weapon to match my own. The attic loomed in my mind, a place of dust and memories, where my mother's truth might still lie hidden. Paul's fear, Edith Klein's secrets, my father's signature, they were all threads I'd pull until Evelyn's fortress crumbled. The town's lights flickered in the distance, a facade of warmth hiding a colder truth. I wasn't fighting for forgiveness anymore, I was fighting for justice, for the woman who'd given everything and been erased. Ms. Walsh's warning about my father's financial mess clung to me as I left her office, the coastal wind sharp against my skin. Evelyn's lies had buried my mother's sacrifice, and my father's complicity was a betrayal I could no longer ignore. His signature on that damning minute wasn't just cowardice, it was a choice to protect his empire over the woman who'd built it with him. I needed more than testimonies now, I needed undeniable proof. The attic of my childhood home loomed in my mind, but first, I turned to Mr. Hayes. His ledger had sparked this fight, and his quiet observance in his antique shop hinted at deeper secrets. I drove through Willow Creek's dusk, the town's lights flickering like a fading lie, to his shop, where relics whispered of truths long buried. The bell above the door chimed as I entered, the air heavy with dust and the scent of polished wood. Mr. Hayes stood behind the counter, his glasses catching the glow of a single lamp, his hands sorting through a stack of old receipts. "Hannah," he said, his voice low, cautious, "you're digging where others stopped." I didn't flinch, my gaze steady. "You gave me the ledger," I said, my tone cold, precise. "It showed my mother's name erased. You knew more. Then you let on. What else do you have?" His fingers paused, a receipt trembling in his grip. He looked at me, his eyes heavy with something like regret, then reached under the counter, pulling out a small, scratched recorder, its plastic casing worn by time. "Your mother left this with me," he said, his voice barely audible. "Called it her insurance. I didn't listen until she was gone." My pulse quickened, but my face remained still, my designers eye catching the weight of his hesitation, the way his hands shook as he set the recorder down. He pressed play, and my mother's voice cut through the shop's silence, clear but edged with fear. "Richard, you can't let Evelyn do this," she said, the static crackling like a storm. "Edith took the market's funds, not me. I covered for her to keep the town together, but Evelyn's twisting it, saying I'm the thief. You know the truth. Why are you letting her?" A pause, then my father's voice, low and strained. "It's easier this way. The stores are bleeding, and the town trusts me. If this gets out, we lose everything." The recording ended, abrupt as a slammed door, leaving the shop's ticking clocks to fill the void. The words hit like a blade, not with grief but with a searing clarity. My father hadn't just stood by, he'd chosen his hardware empire, his precious community standing, over my mother's honor. He'd let Evelyn's lies fester to hide his own financial ruin. I gripped the recorder, its edges biting into my palm, my hand steady despite the fire inside. "Why keep this hidden?" I asked, my voice a knife. Mr. Hayes looked away, his shoulders sagging under the weight of years. "Your father saved my shop once, kept it from foreclosure. I owed him. But when you came back, asking questions, I couldn't stay silent. Your mother deserved better." His guilt was a mirror to Paul's, to Mrs. Carter's, but this was different, a voice from the past, my mother's truth preserved in plastic and tape. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. "Did Evelyn know about this?" Mr. Hayes nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "She suspected your mother had proof. Came here after the funeral, offered to fund the shop's repairs if I handed over anything your mother left. I told her I had nothing." His refusal was a crack in Evelyn's armor, a sign she feared exposure. The shop's relics, clocks, vases, faded photographs, seemed to lean in, witnesses to a betrayal unburied. My mother's voice wasn't just evidence, it was a weapon, one that could shatter Evelyn's carefully crafted image and my father's hollow legacy. "You did the right thing," I said, my tone measured, though my mind raced with strategy. I slipped the recorder into my pocket, its weight a vow to finish what my mother started. The revelation reframed everything. Evelyn hadn't just manipulated the town, she'd hunted for this recording, desperate to keep my mother's voice silenced. My father's words, "The stores are bleeding," confirmed Ms. Walsh's suspicion of a financial mess. His empire, the pride of Willow Creek, was a facade propped up by my mother's sacrifice. I thought of Paul's fear at the pier, Mrs. Carter's tears, the smudged minute in the museum, all threads leading to this moment. My father's rejection at the hospital wasn't just shame, it was fear that I'd uncover his weakness, his complicity in letting Evelyn destroy my mother. My resolve hardened, not with tears but with a cold, calculated focus. This recording was the key to Ms. Walsh's case, a truth that would force Evelyn to face her lies and my father to confront his choices. I stepped toward the door, the shop's bell jingling softly. "Anything else?" I asked, pausing, my hand on the knob. Mr. Hayes hesitated, then pulled a small envelope from a drawer, its edges yellowed, sealed with my mother's handwriting. "She left this too," he said. "Said to give it to you if you ever came looking." I took it, my fingers tracing her script, "For Hannah," but I didn't open it. Not yet. It was another piece, another weapon, and I'd wield it when the time was right. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the storm within. The coastal dusk greeted me outside, heavy with the scent of rain, the town's lights flickering like a dying lie. The attic still waited, but this recording was enough for now, a voice from the past that would echo into Evelyn's future. I drove through Willow Creek, the recorder and an envelope in my pocket, their weight grounding me. Evelyn thought she'd buried the truth, but I was pulling it into the light, piece by damning piece. Ms. Walsh would know how to use this, to turn my mother's words into a legal blade. My father's empire, Evelyn's throne, they were built on my mother's ruin, and I'd tear them down. The ocean's distant roar was a chorus to my resolve, urging me toward the attic, toward whatever truths my mother had left for me. I wasn't the girl who'd left this town 8 years ago, broken and rejected. I was the woman who saw through facades, who'd learned to find truth in details. Evelyn and my father had underestimated me, but they'd learn soon enough. My mother's voice on Mr. Hayes' recorder, pleading, betrayed, still echoed as I stood outside the Willow Creek courthouse, the coastal wind carrying the weight of what I'd unearthed. The envelope in my pocket, her handwriting scrawled across it, remained unopened, its secrets a final gift I'd save for after the fight. Evelyn's lies had crumbled my mother's legacy, my father's complicity had sealed it, but today, I'd end their reign. Ms. Walsh had built our case, Paul's testimony, Mrs. Carter's confession, the smudged minute, and my mother's recorded truth, but one final piece awaited. Paul, Evelyn's husband, had called me last night, his voice shaking, promising to meet before the hearing. I spotted him now, across the courthouse steps, his coat too large for his hunched frame, his eyes darting like a man caught in a trap. "Hannah," Paul said, his voice low, urgent, as he pressed a USB drive into my hand. "I recorded Evelyn last week. She didn't know. It's everything." I took it, my fingers steady, though my pulse quickened. My designers, I caught the fear in his posture, the way his hands trembled, a man breaking free from Evelyn's grip. "Why now?" I asked, my tone cold, unyielding. He looked away, toward the courthouse's gray facade. "I saw what she did to your mother. I let it happen. This is my amends." I nodded, slipping the drive into my pocket next to the envelope, its weight a promise of justice. "You'll testify?" I pressed. He swallowed, then nodded. "I owe her that." Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy, the wooden benches creaking under the weight of Willow Creek's curious. Evelyn sat beside her lawyer, her face a mask of composure, but her eyes flickered when I entered, clutching the USB. My father wasn't there, too frail, they said, but his absence felt like another dodge. Ms. Walsh stood beside me, her presence a steady anchor. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and gray streaks, called the session to order. Ms. Walsh presented our evidence, the minute accusing my mother of theft, Paul's deposition about Evelyn's threats, Mrs. Carter's tearful account of my mother's sacrifice for Edith Klein, and my mother's voice, crackling through the recorder, accusing my father of enabling the lie. Each piece was a brick, building a wall Evelyn couldn't scale. Then came Paul's recording. Ms. Walsh played it, and Evelyn's voice filled the room, cold and venomous. "I made sure she broke," Evelyn said, her words sharp as glass. "Mother loved Hannah more, always did. I couldn't let her take the market, the town, everything. So I pushed until she cracked." Her heart gave out from the shame. Gasps rippled through the courtroom, but I sat still, my face a mask, though the words cut deep. Evelyn's jealousy, raw, petty, and vicious, had driven my mother to her grave. The recording continued, Evelyn's voice dropping. "Father knew. He let me do it because he thought Hannah would expose his debts. He couldn't face her. The truth landed like a gavel. My father's rejection wasn't just cowardice, it was fear that I'd see his weakness, his crumbling empire. Evelyn's composure shattered, her hands gripping the table, her lawyer whispering furiously. The judge's eyes narrowed, her pen pausing. Ms. Walsh pressed forward, her voice steady. The plaintiff seeks a public retraction of the defamation against her mother and damages for the harm caused. The defense scrambled, but Evelyn's recorded confession was a blade too sharp to parry. Paul took the stand, his voice shaking, but clear, confirming every detail: Evelyn's threats, her manipulation, her glee in destroying my mother. The courtroom's silence was deafening, the town's eyes on Evelyn, their golden leader exposed as a fraud. The judge ruled swiftly. A public apology, printed in the Willow Creek Gazette, and damages to restore my mother's name through a community fund in her honor. I won, but as I left the courthouse, the victory felt hollow. The envelope in my pocket burned, unopened, a final conversation with my mother I wasn't ready for. Evelyn's empire was cracked, my father's legacy tarnished, but they were still my family, broken, distant, lost. I walked to the cliffside overlooking the ocean, the town's lights fading behind me. The fight was over, but the cost was clear: justice for my mother, but no family to return to. I stood there, the wind tearing at my coat, and looked back on this journey, not with tears, but with the calm of someone who'd faced every lie and emerged whole. I'd come to Willow Creek to say goodbye, but found a war instead. The ledger, the minute, Paul's fear, Mrs. Carter's guilt, my mother's voice, they were battles, each stripping away the facade of a family I thought I knew. The truth wasn't kind: love can be a weapon, loyalty a chain, and family a mirror of your deepest wounds. For those of us who've been betrayed by kin, the lesson is cold but real: you don't heal by forgiving, you heal by choosing yourself, by building a life where their lies can't reach you. I chose truth, not for them, but for the woman who raised me, who taught me to see the world's details and fight for what's right. To anyone standing where I stood, staring down a family's betrayal, your worth isn't in their approval. It's in the steps you take, the truths you claim, the life you carve from their ashes. Hold your ground, find your allies, and don't let their shadows define you. You're stronger than their lies. If this story moved you, join us for the next one. Subscribe to the channel and help us tell more tales of truth and triumph.